From my observations, homesteaders have a curious mind, an adventurous spirit and a can-do attitude. They find solutions to challenges that arise and they're always learning. I was recently asked, how do you start homesteading? When I talk about homesteading on this channel, I'm talking about living a more self-reliant lifestyle, to be more self-sufficient by growing your own food and medicine and craft supplies, as well as putting back into the soil and improving the land that you have and the space that you have and creating a home. Although I've been homesteading since late last century, it wouldn't be until 20 years later until I would actually hear the term homesteading to describe my way of life. For me, it started out as a way to survive and then later to thrive. I'd recently finished my fitting and turning apprenticeship at the company I'd worked for 6 years. And despite it being a recession, I'd been on a good income for that whole time. And I'd been living in Melbourne with my friends and my family nearby. It was time for a change and I was ready for an adventure. I was ready to travel. Or at least that was the plan. I'd started out my journey on my friend's cattle farm on the border. It was about 3 hours north from where I'd been living in Melbourne. I was learning to ride motorbikes, learning a little bit about cows, doing some fencing, fixing farm machinery, and just hanging out on the farm and really enjoying country life. A few months later I moved to the Strathbogie Ranges, which is where I'm still living now. I was now on a sheep farm in an old country homestead, and this is where my homesteading journey really began. It was rural, isolated, and I had hardly any income. Very different to where I'd come from. Back then there was no internet, there was no homesteading inspiration or shows you could watch to inspire you to live this way. It just came about because we needed to survive. There were heaps of rabbits on the property, and if we wanted to feed our dogs, we had to hunt rabbits every day. If we wanted to stay warm, we had to cut wood. Back then I had a muscle car. It was really expensive to run, but of course it was the only car I'd ever had, so I didn't know that at the time. Obviously I knew it was expensive to run when I didn't have an income. So going to the shops for food was something that was only done once a fortnight. So if we wanted to eat fresh food, we needed to grow our own. Therefore, a vegetable garden needed to be started. So an area needed to be fenced off, composts were started, and then I was gifted a rooster. So it all just evolved as time progressed. If I had known then what I know now and had the skills that I have now, we would have eaten so much better back then. And so to answer the question on how do you start homesteading, I think how you start is to gather skills. Gathering skills these days is so much easier because even though I didn't have an internet back then, I mean, we didn't even have a radio or a television or a telephone back then. So we were completely isolated. We just had to work things out for ourselves. But these days, nearly everybody has the internet and there's so many teachers online teaching you how to do things. So you can learn anything. You can be inspired to do anything. And even though back then I didn't have any preserving equipment or dehydrators, or I didn't even have a decent sized freezer. I just had a little tiny fridge freezer. So I couldn't even store food. And like I said, we were only shopping once a fortnight. But I could grow food and I could hunt food and I could use what I was getting at the time, use it up when I was getting it in. You don't have to do everything when you're starting out. You can just choose certain parts and aspects of homesteading. Like learning how to cut wood safely, learning how to split wood, read the wood so that you can split it easily and that it's an enjoyable task instead of hitting knots and making it hard for yourself. Learning how to light the fire and keep the house warm, knowing what woods are good to burn that make the best hot warm coals and don't leave a lot of mess in your fireplace. Learning about cleaning the chimney so that you don't have a house fire in the chimney. Other skills that can come in handy are cooking animal husbandry, gardening, maintenance, whether it's plumbing, building, mechanics, sewing, knitting, preserving, learning about medicinal herbs. All of these skills will be helpful to you when you're homesteading. It's the last month of spring here on my small homestead, and it's finally starting to warm up. It's been a long winter and we've been on flood watch all spring. By tomorrow, this will be underwater again. Watching the weather is also a part of homesteading. I used to spend my time eagerly awaiting the next rain and looking after the garden in the meantime until the rain came. And now I'm usually wondering when the rain's going to stop or how much rain's going to flood the property. And because the weather is unpredictable and we're always being thrown new challenges, that's why we're always learning. But the skills that you learn start to pay off. Like when you can pull a jar of preserved stone fruit off your shelf that you've jarred yourself from homegrown fruit, and you can open that at the end of spring and make some pies. It's such a rewarding feeling, as well as being delicious too. And while you can learn about new skills on YouTube by watching YouTube videos or by reading in books, the way you really learn is to do it yourself, to get out there and start doing the things so that you are actually getting personal experience, and then you are learning how to do it and you'll know how to do it. You'll have some successes, you'll have some failures, and things may not always go right. But you will be learning the whole time and gaining that experience and knowledge, which will build upon itself. Wherever it is you're homesteading, I think it's important to have a self-sufficient source of water. So whether you have to get some water tanks in, whether you're piping water in straight from the fresh spring, or whether you're piping it in from a dam, whatever it looks like for you where you are, it is important to have water on your homestead. You can't run a homestead if you don't have water. Learning about the predators in the area that you're homesteading in is important too. Learning about the predators that may pose a threat to yourself and your family's well-being, or the predators that are going to eat the vegetables in your vegetable garden or steal the fruit off your fruit trees, or the predators that will want to steal your animals for their next meal. It's a good idea to educate yourself on these things so that you can prevent these things from happening. And if you're educated on, say, like the snakes in your area, then you're not going to be afraid of them. You're going to learn to live with them and be aware of the way they live and how you can manage a situation when you do have encounters with things like deadly snakes. It just becomes a part of life. This may be a little bit unsettling for some of you. It's not for everybody, but it's better to live with the predators if you can than to try and kill them, because you're more likely to get bitten by a snake. In this example, you're 80% more likely to get bitten by a snake if you have a shovel in your hand and you're trying to kill it. I've come into contact with many deadly snakes, from brown snakes, red-bellied black snakes to tiger snakes, and I've had many close encounters where I've just stood still and it's been fine. There are always laws on the animals in your area, so whether you can kill them or not kill them, it depends on where you live and what the rules are. So educating yourself on the laws in your area on the predators is also a good idea. With all the rain that we've been getting, the citrus trees are completely covered in flowers, which is fantastic, except that there's no way that the trees can handle this many flowers. So I'm really reducing the number of flowers so that the tree can really focus on a limited amount of fruit, an amount that the tree will actually be able to support, and it will be a better crop. It's been an absolutely magical day today. It's warm, and the sky has been moving so fast. We're ready for the next storm. Happy homesteading, my friends.